groups are targeting now with a vengeance. And they're doing it with the law, and they're doing it almost unopposed because of that structural asymmetry. You've got those, I just mentioned those 112 women's groups in the National Council for Research on Women that are working night and day on this issue. And I understand their point of view. They want to break down the gender system. There was once a feminist philosopher that I debated, Sandra Lee Barkey, and she said that we're all born into society which she described as the sex-gender system. And she said we're all born, I'm paraphrasing, but this is close, we're all born bisexuals, and then through socialization we are transformed into male and female gendered personalities, one destined to command, the other to obey. I read it to my husband once, and he said, now which one commands? Which one But anyway, just going back, if you've had any exposure to feminist theory, you'll know this is a popular theory that it's socialized, that it's socially constructed, that we're just kind of born as very malleable, and then you're sort of like silly putty, and then society shapes you into male and female, and that's your destiny. Now, I just don't happen to agree with that. I mean, reasonable people disagree, and I don't say there aren't some interesting arguments for the social construction theory, but on the other hand, there's so much evidence that it's hardwired, and that all the things that I'm talking about, the fact that guys are more interested in systems and in the math-based fields, and women are more drawn to fields that engage them emotionally, psychologically, or they want to study living things and not inert things that are, and they don't want to be in the people-free zones as much as the men. Now again, when I say these things, there's always someone who will say, she said women don't want to, do sports, or she said women don't want to be physicists. No, she didn't. I'm simply saying that the pool of people is much smaller. And the pool of women that are fixated and fascinated with sports and whose life depends on it and who would really kind of stay more attuned and connected to school is far more males than females. Just because of going back to that tumbling room, and the girls are just so much more interested in so many other things. So in my view, this celebrated Title IX equity law, which has done so much to help women, and I'm grateful to it as an equity feminist, but it's done gratuitous harm. And it needs to be reformed. Because I think the potential for havoc and destruction is now enormous as it moves from sports, which is just sad, just to do that, and but it moves to math and science, which I think is actually dangerous. Imagine if we have to reduce men's participation in science to the level of female interest, when females are simply less interested, certainly in the physical sciences, which are fields that certainly drive the economy. So just this kind of, this mindset, but this is not abstract, folks. I'm in Washington, D.C. There's a new law that they're trying to pass, the Fulfilling the Potential of Women in Science and Engineering Act. And they just snuck it into the a bill to reauthorize the funding for NSF and so forth. And I told Congressman about it, and I won't mention his name because he later rued the day that he ever did it, because he tried to get it stopped. And then these women's groups went after him. His office, the faxes and the phone telling him that he was opposed to the progress of women and so forth. And that's the problem, because we have these groups that are so highly charged. So what is my solution? Well, I don't really have an answer as to what to do. There is just in terms of sports, there's the College Sports Council, which is trying to bring some sanity into this assault on the male team. But it was lawyers trained in law schools like this one that did play a major role in corrupting a once innocent and good law. But on the more positive side, I think that it's future lawyers like those in this room who are in an excellent position to set things right. So I hope that's what you do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hoff Sommers. Now we're going to proceed to the question and answer period. And I'd just like to ask everyone to please, when you ask your question, make your question brief and to the point, and only one question per series.
Can you point me in the direction of something that makes the argument cogently why the academy should be supporting sports at all?
Well, I know there are a lot of professors who don't like it. They don't like the fraternities. They don't like, the sports. The thing is that these are traditions, and I've watched it up close because I had two sons that went to colleges and were sports fanatics and in fraternities, and it's just a source of enjoyment and meaning and esprit de corps, and if you take away that, I think a lot of people would say you're just taking away the texture and the color and the excitement and the emotion of life. And maybe it's not completely logical and rational, and we'd be better if we didn't have this nonsense, but people really enjoy it. And so that's why I think they'll never give it up. But it does here's what it does create is this, not to get too technical about it, but because basketball and March Madness and all that, there's a lot of happiness to be seen in that period and with their fantasy teams. And then the football on the college, so those are the two huge things, and women's basketball too. But mainly it's this football and basketball. But that takes up so much resources that there's very little left for the non-revenue generating sports. Because it's mostly men's, they're spectacular teams. So then when it comes, that's why there's no places left for the wrestlers and the gymnasts and so. So someone said, well, why don't we just take basketball and football, let's just take that, let's bracket that, and that's part of that tradition. Whereas these other sports are really just, they're the Olympic sports, and it's not part of it. It's not commercial in that sense. But the women's groups always say no, because they have this vision of men and women being, it's kind of unisex society. We have to be. Yes?
If you go by interest alone, like if you say we're going to have sports based on interest, then you might have a situation where women don't have any sports left. Like 95% would be men, and you only have maybe 5% or 2% of sports dedicated to women. So the question is, do you have to have some kind of line? I mean, is there a line you cannot go under? Should there be a line?
Well, I think it's a very good question, because here's what happens, is that there are women that are sports obsessive, just like men, and not only as athletes themselves, but interested. So they're already there. So I think common sense is the guide, which is that and that's what they tried to do about 8 years ago in Washington. There was a move to say, okay, we're not going to keep taking these cases to court and get exact proportionality. We're going to do a survey and ask how many of you are interested in sports and would participate, and see if we're meeting the demand. And that was thought to be just a great compromise. And then if we find out there's all this demand, all these women are interested. But what you find is you'll get maybe 30 or 40%, and you just get more males that want to do it than females. And that seems fine to me, because I don't understand why that's not fine. Now, to be fair to the other side, they will say, but women don't know they're interested. Maybe you were suggesting that. Maybe until but now we do know. I mean, we've seen it. And some women are, and some will never be. But here's another thing I'll add, another wrinkle, is that there is a sport that women seem to really like, and it is cheerleading. And I don't mean sideline cheerleading. I mean these cheerleading competitive stunts and gymnasts. Have you seen it? And they compete against one another. And they can attract like 30, 40, and huge teams. They're very popular. But just now we had a case in at Quinnipiac College where they were not allowed to count that as a Title IX. They could not be fulfilling Title IX. And it was sad for these young women because they are not standing on the sidelines with pom-poms. It's really much more, it's competitive, and it's much more like a sport. And this federal judge just said, no, doesn't count. And the women's groups were very happy because they thought, well, we don't want women being cheerleaders. It has all sorts of associations. But I'm just thinking, like, what? I mean, yes, if you're a hardline feminist, you think it's terrible, but most women don't think of it that way. They should at least take a survey and see how we feel, and women do like that. And of course, you have dance programs; those are dominated by women. And by your question, you can say, well, what is it, a dance program? And it was only 5% men and 95% women. Well, it probably is, and that's not problematized in Title IX. Yes.
What authority? I mean, aside from the practical evolution of constitutionalism in America, what enumerated power does Title IX fall under in terms of congressional authority? Where do equal protection? Is that what they're claiming?
Well,
how is this a federal law?
Originally, it was part of the equal protection, and what was very interesting, and this is how things work in Washington, which is so dismaying to me to see it up close, is that there weren't all these big controversies. There was some friction as women moved in to take more of the resources from athletic programs. But in 1979, there was an official in the Department of Education. Her name was Norma Cantu, and a lot of colleges said, we really don't know what is a safe harbor. We don't want to run afoul of Title IX because you lose your federal funding, and no one wants that. And she rewrote the regs, and she said, there are 3 ways you can fulfill, in the past, she said there were 3 ways you could fulfill it. You could show that you were meeting demand, you could show that you were gradually moving towards equity, or you could have proportionality. You can have, if you've got 56% women and you've got 50% athletes, that's your safe harbor. That's the way to go. And the colleges then thought, okay, that's where we have to go. Because nobody, people, it makes you nervous that you're going to be sued and losing your money. And athletic directors don't have a lot of power that they can be ordered. That's why I'm wondering if the scientists are going to be as easy to manage as the athletic directors will, because the scientists are professors and they'll just fight back. It won't be as easy to force them to have proportionality in a physics department. But forgetting that for a moment, that's how they did it. So it started out as, yes, a law that was based on equal protection, and then evolved into, mutated into a quota regime that's quite merciless and irrational, given all the other areas where women are ahead of men. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious about what provisions of Title IX allow a proportionality argument to be made. It seems like other areas of equal protection, they don't allow that kind of argument. There are a lot of Supreme Court cases where they flat out reject quota systems. So I'm kind of wondering how legally they can make an argument like that.
The Michigan cases.
But I thought that those reject quota systems.
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah.
They do. I'll tell you, if you want to have an unpleasant experience, just go and read these cases. Like Brown University lost a case where, I think it was 90, I want to say 96. They were a great example of a school that was doing right by women and offering every conceivable team, but then they had to cut back a little, and they took an equal amount of men's and women's teams there, and the women sued, and it went to court, and Brown was able to show that they had satisfied demand, and that it was just one sport they were eliminating, but they were giving women all these other sports. And they had at the time, I forget the exact statistics, but 52% women, and women were, 43% of the athletes. And the judge ruled that Brown was guilty of discrimination, that these women were victims of, unfairness and invidious treatment by Brown, and that they were protected by Title IX, and they were ordered to move towards proportionality. And after that, every college was put on a notice, and that was, as I said, 96. And one case after the other, the men's teams lose. And here's what I think happens. I watched this case at Quinnipiac with the cheerleaders. You had a case where there were like 4 young women that played